Noble warriors defending the weak, chivalrous heroes following honorable codes, skilled swordsmen respected by all. Hollywood's knights are romantic fiction designed to sell tickets, not reflect the brutal reality of armored warriors who were more like medieval tanks than heroes. Real knights were professional killers from wealthy families, trained from childhood in violence, operating under honor codes that permitted assault, murder, and pillaging with legal protection. Strip away the romance and you'd see something darker. A military class whose entire existence was predicated on violence, whose training was systematic brutalization, and whose warfare tactics make modern people recoil. Once you understand what knights actually were, every movie depiction becomes a comfortable lie. Stand in a noble household and watch a 7-year-old boy sent away to begin knight training. You'd see children stripped from families and handed to other nobles to be systematically trained in violence for the next decade. This wasn't education, it was military indoctrination starting in early childhood. The page stage began at 7 to 8 years old. You'd watch boys learning to serve nobles, care for equipment, and begin basic combat training. They were children handling weapons, learning to kill before they understood death. The psychological impact was deliberate. Create warriors before empathy fully developed. At 14, pages became squires, full combat assistants who accompanied knights to war. You'd see teenage boys on battlefields, killing and watching killing. Their adolescence spent in violence, many didn't survive to knighthood. Those who did were psychologically shaped by childhood trauma that modern psychology would recognize as abuse, designed to create effective killers. Knights weren't heroes who chose their path. They were children indoctrinated into violence before they could question it. Stand in a captured town after siege and watch the chivalrous knights exercise their legal rights under medieval warfare doctrine. You'd see systematic assault of civilian women, children, and anyone considered legitimate plunder. The chivalric code that supposedly governed knight behavior explicitly permitted this as reward for victory. The laws of war were clear. If a town fell to assault rather than negotiated surrender, everything inside became legal plunder. That included people you'd watch knights who'd earlier performed elaborate courtly rituals now participating in mass sexual violence that was legally protected and culturally accepted. The contrast between courtly love poetry and wartime assault reveals chivalry's true nature, a class code that protected noble women while considering lower-class women legitimate spoils of war. Knights composed romantic verses for ladies, then assault peasant women without legal or moral consequence. Chivalry wasn't a universal honor code, it was a class-based system that protected some while licensing violence against others. Stand on a battlefield and watch the actual combat performance of average knights. You'd see that despite decades of training, most knights were mediocre fighters whose primary advantage was expensive equipment and mounted mobility, not superior skill. The training emphasized lance work and horseback combat because those were force multipliers. But you'd watch knights dismounted and realize years of training hadn't made them exceptional swordsmen or wrestlers. Many common soldiers with weapons training were better fighters, they just lacked armor and horses. The tournament circuit revealed this. You'd see the same handful of knights winning consistently, while hundreds of others lost repeatedly. Combat effectiveness followed wealth. Best equipment and constant practice made winners, not inherent skill. Most knights were adequately trained wealthy men, not warrior elites. Knights' effectiveness came from equipment and tactics, not from being superior individual fighters. Stand after a battle and watch knights executing prisoners despite ransom value. You'd see practical calculations. Feeding prisoners was expensive, guarding them diverted resources, transporting them slowed movement. Often it was cheaper and easier to kill them. The Agincourt prisoner massacre demonstrated this. You'd watch Henry V order the execution of French noble prisoners, men worth enormous ransoms, because he feared they'd rejoin the fight. Hundreds of wealthy nobles were murdered despite violation of ransom customs. Pragmatism trumped honor codes when circumstances demanded it. Lower-class prisoners had it worse. You'd see common soldiers executed routinely because they had no ransom value. The chivalric code protecting noble prisoners explicitly excluded commoners. Knights would kill dozens of peasant soldiers without hesitation, while carefully preserving noble captives for ransom. Knights murdered prisoners regularly when economically or tactically convenient. Ransom customs protected only those worth money. Stand in battle and watch heavily armored knights becoming easy targets. You'd see that expensive plate armor marked wearers as valuable ransom targets, making them priority focus for enemy forces. The armor that should have protected them made them targets. The weight and restriction made armored knights vulnerable in specific situations. You'd watch them bogged in mud at Agincourt, unable to rise when knocked down at Bannockburn, drowning when they fell in rivers at Cressy. The armor that protected against weapons created vulnerabilities to terrain and circumstance. The heat management killed knights regularly. You'd see heavily armored warriors collapsing from heat exhaustion during summer campaigns, dying inside their protective shells because they couldn't cool down fast enough. The armor became a death trap in the wrong conditions. Knight armor was an expensive liability that helped and hindered equally and sometimes killed its wearers without enemy involvement. Stand in the countryside during chevauchée campaigns and watch knights systematically destroying food supplies, killing livestock, burning crops. You'd see deliberate starvation used as a weapon to force enemy nobles into submission by destroying their economic base. The English used this tactic extensively in France. You'd watch knights burning villages, slaughtering animals, destroying mills and granaries. The goal wasn't fighting other knights, it was making civilian life unsustainable until French nobles surrendered or paid tribute. Thousands of civilians starved while knights collected pay for systematic destruction. The chivalric code said nothing about protecting civilians from economic warfare. You'd see knights who'd refuse to strike unarmed nobles burning peasant homes without hesitation. The honor system applied only to their social equals. Everyone else was a legitimate target for total war tactics that would be war crimes today. The scale of destruction was staggering. You'd watch single chevauchée campaigns lay waste to regions spanning hundreds of miles. Destroying everything of value, knights treated this as legitimate employment. They were paid wages to burn, kill, and destroy civilian infrastructure. The peasants whose labor supported the entire feudal system were considered acceptable casualties in disputes between nobles. The long-term consequences were catastrophic. You'd see regions taking generations to recover from systematic destruction. Entire villages disappeared permanently. Populations declined dramatically in war zones, not from battle casualties, but from starvation and displacement caused by knight campaigns. The military class was literally destroying the economic foundation they depended on. Economic warfare through civilian starvation was standard knight tactic, not aberration. It was how campaigns were won. The reality gets worse when you examine economics. You'd watch knights functioning as licensed protection rackets, extracting payments from villages they were supposedly defending. They'd demand food, lodging, and money from peasants who had no choice but to comply. Refusal meant the knights would simply take what they wanted by force and face no legal consequences. The difference between knights requisitioning supplies and common bandits stealing was purely semantic. Both groups showed up armed, took what they wanted, and left villages poorer. Knights were just bandits with legal paperwork and better equipment, cloaked in the illusion of honor and divine duty, exploiting peasants under the guise of service to their lords and the so-called greater good. Stand in a noble household and calculate what creating a knight actually costs. You'd see expenses that would bankrupt entire villages. Equipment, horses, training, maintenance. Knighthood wasn't about merit or skill. It was a purchased privilege available only to wealthy families. A single warhorse cost what a peasant family earned in 10 years. You'd watch nobles maintaining stables of specialized horses, destriers for combat, coursers for travel, palfreys for display. Each required feeding, housing, training, and replacement when killed or injured. The horse expenses alone excluded 99% of the population from knighthood. The armor represented generational wealth. You'd see full plate armor costing equivalent to small farms, requiring constant maintenance and periodic replacement. Add weapons which were specialized and expensive. Training costs over 15 years, and support staff needed to maintain everything. A knight represented an investment equivalent to a modern luxury sports car every year. Knighthood was hereditary wealth marker, not earned status. You were born into it or stayed out forever. Stand on campaign and watch knights making tactical decisions. You'd see systematic avoidance of anything resembling fair combat. Knights won through ambush, overwhelming numbers, and attacking vulnerable targets, not through honorable single combat. The tactical doctrine was clear: engage only when you have decisive advantage. You'd watch knights refusing battle when outnumbered, attacking supply trains instead of armies, ambushing foraging parties rather than facing formed units. The tournament fantasy of matched combat was exactly that. Fantasy that had no place in real warfare. When knights did fight other knights, they aimed to capture, not kill. Dead nobles produced no ransom. You'd see battlefield behavior that prioritized profit over victory, with knights avoiding lethal strikes against wealthy opponents while butchering common soldiers. Combat was a business transaction, not a heroic contest. Knights were pragmatic fighters who avoided fair fights. Honor was for tournaments, survival was for war. Stand in military camp and watch more knights die from dysentery than battle wounds. You'd see the unheroic reality. Disease killed far more armored warriors than enemy weapons ever did. The romantic death in combat was a rare exception, not rule. Campaign conditions created perfect disease vectors. You'd watch hundreds of knights camp together with inadequate sanitation, contaminated water, and poor food preservation. Dysentery, typhoid, and cholera swept through camps regularly. The armor and heavy clothing that was protected in battle made hygiene difficult and disease spread easier. Wounded knights often died from infection rather than injury. You'd see battlefield medicine that was primitive at best. Wounds cleaned with questionable water, treated with ineffective remedies, then sealed inside armor that created perfect bacterial growth conditions. A minor cut could become a fatal infection within days. The mortality rates during crusades revealed the truth. You'd watch more crusader knights die on the march from disease than in all the battles combined. Entire campaigns collapsed not from military defeat, but from disease decimating forces before they reached their objectives. The Third Crusade lost thousands of knights to sickness during the siege of Acre, more than died fighting Saladin's armies. Knights' deaths were usually inglorious, shitting themselves to death in camp, not dying heroically in battle. Stand in the late medieval period and watch knights desperately maintaining social exclusivity as merchant wealth challenged their dominance. You'd see systematic legal and cultural barriers erected to prevent wealthy merchants from accessing knighthood and its privileges. The requirements became increasingly arbitrary. You'd watch rules implemented requiring multiple generations of noble ancestry, specific land ownership types, and elaborate ceremonies that served mainly to keep nouveau riche merchants out. Knights recognized that their status depended on exclusivity. If anyone wealthy could become knight, the prestige disappeared. The resistance to change was fierce and ultimately futile. You'd see knights fighting political battles to maintain privileges. While merchant wealth funded kings and bought influence knights couldn't match, the knight class was becoming obsolete economically, but refused to acknowledge it culturally. Knights' final battle was preserving exclusive status against economic forces that made their military role obsolete, and they lost. Strip away centuries of romantic revision and medieval knights reveal themselves as what they actually were: a hereditary military class that used systematic violence, operated under self-serving honor codes, and maintained power through inherited wealth and legal privilege. The gap between knight mythology and knight reality shows how effectively we've sanitized brutal history into comfortable entertainment. Every movie knight performing heroic deeds is comfortable fiction built on foundation of child soldiers, systematic assault, deliberate starvation, and class-based violence. The real knights were more complex and far darker than Hollywood admits. Professional killers whose existence was predicated on violence that modern society would recognize as war crimes. Understanding real knights means abandoning romantic fantasies and confronting uncomfortable historical truth. The heroes were often the villains, just wearing better armor.